I was enjoying my coffee, watching the sun peek through the blinds, and trying to ignore the loud chirping of the birds outside, when the door shook on its hinges. I froze. That was no regular knock. It was more like someone had taken a sledgehammer to the door. My first thought was maybe a kid kicked the ball too hard, but the sound kept coming. Then came the pounding. Loud, insistent, like they meant business. I shuffled to the door, wiped the sleep out of my eyes, and cracked it open just a sliver. Before I could ask what the hell was going on, a voice I didn't recognize shouted, "Open up. You're in violation." I blinked once, twice, still not processing. I mean, what kind of violation are we talking about here? Traffic ticket? Noise complaint? Burglary? But no, it was the HOA, at least. That's who they claimed to be. And apparently, I was the latest casualty in their war against personal freedom. The next thing I knew, they were kicking in the door, and I had two cops standing there, glaring at me like I was the scum of the earth. The one on the left looked like he'd never missed a day at his weekly HOA boot camp, while the other one was clutching a clipboard with the intensity of a man who just received the power of life and death over my backyard fence. "Sir," clipboard guy started, his voice tight like he had something to prove, "you're in violation of the HOA bylaws. You've got unauthorized structure on your property. We need to conduct an inspection." I stood there, still holding my coffee, trying to process just how surreal this moment was. Violating HOA rules, the ones that don't even apply to me. And now this. A formal raid, complete with clipboard-wielding warriors who probably had more tactical training than they needed for lawn maintenance. Before I could say anything, the first guy pulled out a piece of paper, waving it in my face like it was a royal decree. "You have 48 hours to comply, or we'll take further action." Yeah, right. I knew exactly what kind of action this was going to be. It wasn't about bylaws or rules. This was just the HOA playing dirty. But something told me this wasn't over, not by a long shot. Now here's the thing, this was a total setup. I didn't live in an HOA. Hell, I didn't even know my neighborhood had an HOA. And if they did, they had clearly missed the memo that I wasn't on their roster. But here they were, standing in my living room like they had the right to oversee every inch of my property, my lawn, my life. I tried to keep my voice steady as I asked, "What HOA? I'm not even in your jurisdiction." "You've got the wrong guy." The clipboard guy barely even blinked, which honestly should have tipped me off right then and there. This wasn't about enforcing rules. It was about power. And I wasn't going to be their next victim. He gave me that smug look people get when they're about to drop a bomb they think will shut you up. "We've expanded our borders, sir," he said, his words as smooth as oil. "The Greater Maple Ridge HOA has recently annexed your property. You were notified of this in the community newsletter." I almost choked on my coffee. A community newsletter. I never got anything. No letters. No knocks. No emails. And I sure as hell didn't sign anything that says I'm part of your little HOA empire. He nodded, unfazed, and waved his hand dismissively. "We've been doing door-to-door notifications for the last month. It's part of the expansion process. You should have read your mail better." I shook my head. No way. No one had come knocking at my door. No one had left any official notices. This was their idea of a takeover. They were making this all up as they went along, probably hoping I'd be too confused or intimidated to question them. Then the second guy, the one with a buzz cut and a vest that looked like it was borrowed from a Halloween costume store, chimed in. "Sir, this is an official inspection. We need to verify your compliance with the new rules. You're in violation, and if you resist, this could escalate quickly." That was the moment I realized they were playing dirty. They had no legal ground to stand on, but they were banking on intimidation. They thought I'd roll over and let them do whatever they wanted because they wore badges that had no real authority and carried clipboards like they were some kind of law enforcement. So I did the one thing I knew would get under their skin. I stood my ground and stared them down. "Listen, I'm not signing anything, and I'm not letting you into my house. You're not law enforcement, and you don't have a warrant. You're trespassing." The second guy flinched like I'd slapped him. "But clipboard guy," he smiled, that fake, "I know something you don't, grin. We'll be noting your resistance," he said, pulling out his phone like he was about to file charges for, what exactly? Standing up for myself? "I hope you do," I shot back, "because I love paperwork." With that, they turned and left, but not without giving me the most smug look like they had won some victory. As they got into their car, I couldn't help but notice the HOA badge taped to the inside of their windshield. It was printed, laminated, and surprise, crooked. That's when I snapped a few quick photos of everything. The badge, their license plate, their gear, everything. My phone was already buzzing with texts from neighbors who had seen them pull up. One had snapped a picture of them too. As I watched them drive off, I couldn't help but shake my head. The whole thing was so ridiculous, it almost seemed like a bad joke. But as soon as I posted the pictures online, things started to get interesting. The comments on the local neighborhood board blew up faster than I could blink. One neighbor wrote, "Same guys knocked on my barn door last week, said they needed to check the feed for some kind of health violation." Another added, "This isn't compliance, this is straight up intimidation." But the best one came from Old Man Duffy for Houses Down. "I told y'all years ago, Karen said, 'Oh, it isn't a neighborhood group, it's a damn cult.'" I had to laugh. Duffy had always been the local conspiracy guy, but in this case I had to admit he wasn't wrong. What was supposed to be a local community association, it turned into a twisted little empire led by someone who seemed more like a dictator than a concerned neighbor. Then my phone rang. I didn't even have to look at the caller ID to know who it was. Karen Whitaker. Of course. I could already hear her voice in my head, smug, condescending, and dripping with that same step-forward-like confidence she always had. "Mr. Callahan," she said, "no hello, no pleasantries, just straight to business. I'm calling to confirm that you've received the formal notice." I almost snorted. "You mean the one you illegally nailed to my gate?" She was quick to dismiss me, of course. "Nailed is a harsh term. Secured for visibility," she corrected, her voice tight with the kind of fake professionalism I couldn't stand. "It's not illegal under the new emergency expansion guidelines." I couldn't help myself. "Which guidelines?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "The ones you voted on last quarter." She didn't miss a beat. "It was for residents of Simmons Valley." "I don't live in Simmons Valley," I shot back. "You are now," she replied coolly. And then, without another word, she hung up. I stood there, holding the phone, staring at the screen. What the hell just happened? I wasn't in Simmons Valley. I didn't even know there was an HOA in the first place. And now, apparently, I was part of it whether I liked it or not. The next morning, as I walked outside to grab the paper, something caught my eye. Orange flags. Survey markers. All lined up at the edge of my north field like someone had come in overnight and just stuck them there. At first, I thought it might be a random survey crew, or maybe some construction company looking to build something next door. But the more I looked, the more I realized these were no ordinary markers. They were numbered, and each one had a small, black, sharp-written coordinate next to it. Someone had planned this out. I walked over to the closest one and yanked it out of the ground. As I held the plastic flag in my hand, a chill ran down my spine. This wasn't just some accidental land survey. This was intentional. They were mapping my property. And if I didn't do something about it now, I knew exactly what was coming next. The kicker, the goats. They had already managed to chew through a couple of them, happily munching on whatever the hell they could get their mouths on. I couldn't help but chuckle as I watched them. If there was any animal that could care less about HOA zoning laws, it was my goats. But I didn't have time for that. I snapped a few more pictures of the flags and then stormed inside. Something told me that this was only the beginning. I could feel it, the trap was set, and now they were coming to collect. I grabbed the phone again, dialed the county office, and demanded to speak with someone in charge. When the woman on the other end answered, I didn't waste time. "I need to report an attempted impersonation of law enforcement. 2 guys came to my house pretending to be HOA compliance officers, flashing badges, and demanding I let them inspect my property." She didn't seem too surprised. "Oh, you're number 12, she said matter-of-factly. "We've had a few complaints like this already." "Few." I repeated. "How many is a few?" 11 others. "You're 12, she answered, her tone oddly calm, like this kind of thing was just a Tuesday around here. My mind raced. 12 other people, all dealing with the same creepy goons. I couldn't believe it, but then it started to make sense. These people weren't just after my fence or my barn. This wasn't about property violations, it was about control. They were testing the waters, seeing how far they could push people before they snapped. "So, what's being done about it?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She paused, then sighed. "Nothing yet. Most people just pay the fine or they move. It's easier that way. Not me. I wasn't going to let them get away with it. Not when I had a whole crew of neighbors who were just as pissed off as I was. But I wasn't going to act alone. I had a feeling I was going to need some backup, and I knew exactly who to call. I wasn't about to let this slide, not without a fight. So I did what any reasonable person would do in this situation. I called in the cavalry, my biker crew. Now, my crew isn't your typical gang of weekend warriors. These are guys and gals who don't just talk the talk, they walk the walk. We've been through our share of scrapes and run-ins with authority, but nothing like this. When I told them what was going on, they were all in. No questions asked. They showed up at my place within the hour, revving their engines so loud that the ground seemed to shake beneath me. If I hadn't known better, I would have thought they were ready to storm a battlefield. But no, this wasn't a war, it was a message. The crew pulled up, parking their bikes with military precision, as if they were assembling for some covert mission. Each of them was dressed in the usual leather jackets and battle-worn gear, with patches that spoke volumes. Outlaw, rebel, freedom, all the good stuff. But it wasn't the patches that made an impact. It was the attitude. The sheer presence they had as they dismounted, eyes narrowed, ready to make a statement. Brief them quickly. The HOA just hit me with some ridiculous violation. They claim to have authority over my property, but it's all bogus. We need to go over there and show them we're not backing down. Sounds like they've been playing dress-up, one of my guys, Mick, said with a grin. Let's go remind them what real power looks like. And just like that, we were off. As we rode down the road, the sound of our engines reverberated through the valley. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't quiet. It was an unmistakable declaration of intent. We weren't coming to negotiate, we were coming to take control of the situation. When we pulled up to the HOA clubhouse, I could see through the front windows that they hadn't been expecting company. The place looked like a small, overgrown office building that had no business being in the middle of our neighborhood, and the lights flickered inside like the building was holding on by a thread. But when they saw us, saw the roar of the bikes and the faces of the crew who got off one by one, they knew they weren't dealing with anyone who'd back down. I watched as Karen, who was standing outside with a clipboard in hand, no doubt ready to take action on something ridiculous, stiffened the moment she saw us. She forced a smile. Gentlemen, she said, trying to sound calm, but the tremor in her voice was enough to give her away. I hope you're not here to cause any trouble. I stepped forward, making sure I was front and center. Oh, we're not here to cause trouble, Karen, I said with a smirk. We're here to remind you that you don't get to push people around. Not today, not ever. The crew flanked me like a wall, standing tall with their leather jackets and their steely gazes locked on her and the couple of HOA lackeys who had come to greet us. They were outnumbered, outclassed, and they knew it. I took a step closer to her. You've made a big mistake thinking you can walk all over people like this. We're not afraid of your codes or your threats. Karen didn't flinch, but I could see her hands shake just a little as she gripped the clipboard tighter. She was trying to keep her composure, but it was slipping. You don't understand, Mr. Callahan, she said, her voice tight now. This is for the greater good of the community. Yeah? Tell that to the people who don't want your so-called greater good. This is about control. And we're not going to let you pull this crap without a fight. She took a step back, her eyes flickering from one biker to the next, calculating how far she could push before this thing exploded in her face. And that's when it hit me. Karen wasn't scared of the bikers. She was scared of the message we were sending. The message that we weren't going to roll over. The message that when you mess with the wrong person, you'll have a whole lot more to deal with than you bargained for. As Karen's smile started to fade, I couldn't help but notice the unease in her eyes. She had expected some lone wolf standing up to her, and I guess in a way I had been that guy before. But not this time. This time, I wasn't alone. Behind me, the rest of the crew stood tall, a wall of leather and steel. Mick, with his rough-around-the-edges grin, cracked his knuckles like he was getting ready for a fight. Rosie, the quiet one, who'd never needed to say much to make an impact, kept her arms crossed, her eyes locked on the HO goons like she was mentally running through their escape routes. Then there was Big Jim, a mountain of a man who made every step sound like thunder. He was chewing on a toothpick, but there was nothing casual about the way his eyes studied the situation. These weren't just my friends, they were my crew. They didn't get involved in drama unless it was necessary, and believe me, when it came to protecting what was mine, they were the first people I knew I could count on. I think you've met the team. I said, throwing a quick glance over my shoulder. Each of them's got a little something special they bring to the table. Mick here's our strategist. Always knows what to say to get people to back off. Mick winked, then added, and I'm real good at making things disappear when needed. Rosie's the muscle, I continued. You don't want to mess with her if you value your kneecaps. Rosie's grin was as sharp as ever, but it wasn't friendly. Big Jim, here's the wild card. I finished, slapping Big Jim on the shoulder. He grunted in acknowledgement, looking like a bulldozer in human form. He likes to keep things simple, get in, get out, no fuss. With each name, Karen's composure chipped away just a little more. She was starting to realize she wasn't just dealing with some random guy on his own. She was up against a crew of people who wouldn't just roll over. We weren't intimidated by her empty threats or her poorly printed official paperwork. I could see her shift her weight, her hand tightening around the clipboard like she was trying to summon some last bit of confidence, but she was losing control fast. You can't just show up here like this, she stammered. We have rules. We're protecting the community. Community? I raised an eyebrow. Is that what you're calling this little empire of yours now? You're not protecting anything. You're trying to control everything. Maybe you should leave, she said, her voice faltering. But I could see the wheels turning in her head, trying to figure out what kind of power move to make next. I didn't give her the chance to regroup. We'll leave, sure, I said. But I think it's time someone taught you a lesson in respect. I gave a small nod to Mick, and that was all it took. The crew sprang into action. We moved like clockwork, no one speaking, just following the plan. Big Jim and Rosie stayed near the front as we walked toward the building, pushing through the doors without waiting for permission. Mick was already scanning the place, his eyes darting between the scattered desks and the absurdly ornate chairs, clearly not designed for a neighborhood association, but rather a tiny corporate empire. The moment we walked through the doors of the HOA Clubhouse, the atmosphere shifted. It was like a switch had been flipped. The few people inside, two of Karen's lackeys and a couple of secretarial types, immediately froze. They were all clearly caught off guard, their eyes wide as they scrambled to figure out what to do. Mick took the lead, his hands shoved in the pockets of his leather jacket, exuding that kind of calm confidence that made people nervous. So this is where all the official business happens, huh? He mused aloud, his voice thick with sarcasm. Pretty underwhelming for an empire. One of Karen's lackeys, who looked like he'd been trying to look tough in a button-down shirt and khakis, swallowed hard and stood up. You can't just barge in here. This is a private facility. Private. Big Jim boomed from behind me, his massive form blocking the door like a human barricade. Seems more like a private little club with delusions of grandeur. You think you can just show up and bully people into submission? Rosie didn't say a word, but her presence alone made the air thick with tension. She stood off to the side, her eyes scanning the room like she was ready to rip it apart if anything went wrong. Meanwhile, I was watching Karen, who had stayed quiet for a beat longer than I expected. The fear in her eyes was starting to show, but she still tried to hold on to her little game. She adjusted her windbreaker, attempting to regain some shred of authority, and smiled, though it was more of a grimace. We don't have time for this, she snapped, her voice a little too high-pitched. You're disturbing the peace. You're trespassing. I'm calling the cops. Go ahead, Mick said, his grin widening. But I'm pretty sure we're the ones being harassed here. You've got no jurisdiction over anyone in this neighborhood. Karen's eyes darted from one biker to the next, clearly sizing us up. She could see the way we moved, with a practiced ease, like we were used to walking into places with a full intention of taking over. You will regret this, she said, her voice trembling with barely contained fury. But there was something else in her eyes, too, fear. She was starting to understand that the power balance was shifting. Fast. I've got a better idea, I said, taking a few steps toward her. How about you stop wasting everyone's time with these stupid violations, and we'll call it even? She didn't answer immediately, but I saw her shift her stance. She wasn't ready to back down, not yet. But I could see the wheels turning in her head, trying to figure out how far she could push this before it all came crashing down. I didn't give her the luxury of time. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the photos of the violation notice she'd left on my gate, the ones I'd taken the night before. I've got a lot of evidence here, I said, slapping the photos down on the table. Evidence that this whole thing is bogus. You've been pulling this same stunt on other people, haven't you? Trying to push them out so you can buy up the land. Well, not here. Not anymore. At that moment, I could see her confidence shatter like glass. She hadn't expected me to come in with this much firepower, and now she was left scrambling, trying to figure out how to save face in front of her lackeys. As Karen's lackeys shuffled nervously in the background, her usual sense of control was slipping away. She knew she was out of her depth, and the wheels in her head were spinning. What could she do to get out of this mess? The idea that she could just bully us into backing down was evaporating fast. That's when I saw it, the slight hesitation in her eyes, the moment when she realized she couldn't just wave a piece of paper around and expect us to scatter like scared rabbits. You think you can just come in here, throw your weight around, and we'll all roll over? I asked, my voice steady, matching her frustration with a calm, almost mocking demeanor. That's not how this works. She narrowed her eyes at me, and for a second, I could see her struggling to regain control. But she was getting desperate. I'm giving you one last chance to leave, she said, her voice shaky, but still trying to hold onto some semblance of authority. I leaned forward, hands on the table, staring her down. You've already crossed a line, Karen. This isn't about leaving. It's about making sure you never pull this stunt again. That's when I nodded at Mick, who was already pulling out his phone. It's time we paid a visit to the clubhouse, don't you think? The crew knew exactly what I meant. We've been planning this for a while. This wasn't just about getting under Karen's skin. No, it was about sending a message. If the HOA thought they could intimidate me into submission, they were gravely mistaken. And it wasn't just me they'd messed with anymore. Now they'd be dealing with my whole community, my biker crew. We weren't just going to show up. We were going to make sure everyone at that clubhouse understood who was in charge. Mick hit the record button on his phone and started filming. Hey, Karen, you're going to love this. Watch as we remind everyone exactly what happens when you mess with the wrong people. Big Jim cracked his knuckles behind me, making it clear that the situation was about to escalate fast. But I didn't let the tension show on my face. This wasn't about getting into a fight. It was about making sure the HOA knew this was my turf now. And they were going to pay the price for trying to stomp all over it. The moment we stepped outside the HOA clubhouse, it was like the world shifted. The air felt heavier, charged with anticipation. We weren't just about to ride into some random building. We were about to crash the gates of a small, self-righteous empire that thought it could trample over everyone's rights with a clipboard and a couple fake badges. Mick fired up his bike first, the roar of the engine breaking the silence like thunder. One by one, the rest of us followed suit, the engines growling to life, their sounds vibrating through the valley. You could almost hear the ground shake as the crew revved their engines. This wasn't just a ride. This was a statement. We took off together, side by side, the rumble of our bikes echoing through the streets like the opening act of a storm. It was impossible to ignore, impossible not to feel the weight of it. It wasn't just the sound of the bikes. It was the sheer force of the message we were sending. As we cruised down the road, it was clear that the HOA was about to get a taste of what real authority looked like. No one on this stretch of land was going to forget what happened here today. Every bike on that road was a symbol of defiance, of not backing down, of standing tall against the kinds of people who thought they could control others through fear and intimidation. We reached the clubhouse a few minutes later. The bikes slowed, the growl of the engines fading as we came to a stop in front of the building. The sight of it, those small glass windows and that sterile corporate-looking sign that read Simmons Valley Homeowners Association, made my blood boil. Without a word, we dismounted, each of us moving with a quiet confidence that only came from knowing we were in the right. As the crew peeled off their helmets, the air around us seemed to grow thick with the weight of expectation. People inside had seen us coming. They knew what was happening. Mick took the lead again. Let's remind them who runs this place, he said, his voice low, but full of intent. With that, we walked toward the doors, and it wasn't just the doors of the clubhouse we were walking through. We were walking into the heart of the HOA's delusions of control. We were about to shatter their little bubble. We walked up to the front doors of the clubhouse, the sound of our boots echoing in the silence. No one was moving inside, but I could see the faint shadows through the frosted glass, the movement of people who had clearly seen us coming. I couldn't help but smile. This wasn't going to be pretty for them, but it was about to be real clear who they'd been messing with. Big Jim swung the door open with one firm push, and the sound of it creaking on its hinges was like the start of a countdown. We stepped inside, and immediately the atmosphere shifted. You could almost taste the tension in the air. Every person inside stopped what they were doing, their eyes darting to us, wide with shock and panic. The front office was sterile, everything in its place, but it felt empty, like it had been built to give an illusion of control, an illusion they were now losing fast. I locked eyes with Karen, who was standing behind a desk, her posture ramrod straight, trying to regain some shred of authority. She swallowed, her eyes flicking from me to my crew as if she was mentally counting up all the ways this could go wrong for her. You can't just barge in here like this, she stammered, but her voice cracked. This is private property. Private property? I repeated, my voice smooth but full of venom. Is that what you call this place? A private little dictatorship? Well, Karen, it's time to take that illusion down a few notches. You've been playing this game for too long. You thought you could push people around with your little fines and your fake badges, but that stops here. I saw a few of her lackeys exchange nervous glances, but they didn't move. They knew better than to challenge us, especially now that we were inside. There were 6 of us, and only 3 of them. The math wasn't hard to do. Mick looked over at the receptionist, a young woman who had been eyeing us with wide, frightened eyes. What's going on here? He asked, his tone less threatening but still firm. The receptionist hesitated, but then seeing Mick's easy smile that didn't reach his eyes, she spoke up. We've been getting reports of violations, people not complying with the HOA codes. It's just what we're told to do. We didn't mean for it to escalate like this. You didn't mean for it to escalate? I asked, stepping closer, my voice quiet but intense. Let me tell you something. You escalated it the moment you sent people to my house, kicking down my door like a bunch of rent-a-cops. And now you're going to tell me that you didn't mean for any of this to happen. I glanced back at the crew, and they all stood with their arms crossed, unfazed, but their presence was loud. Every single one of them was locked in, staring down at the lackeys who had thought they could push people like us around. Karen cleared her throat, her hand shaking as she set the clipboard down on the desk. This isn't the way to handle this. We just need to conduct an inspection and— No, I interrupted, cutting her off before she could finish. You're done here, Karen. You've been exploiting people for long enough. This isn't about an inspection or some fine. This is about control, and you're going to answer for it. Karen opened her mouth to argue, but her voice faltered. I could see it, the cracks in her composure, the way she was starting to realize that she had no leverage left. The thing is, when you've built your whole empire on fear and intimidation, it doesn't take much to break it down. Get out of here, I said, stepping closer to her desk, towering over it. And if you ever send your people to my house again, or to anyone else's, you'll regret it. For a moment, there was silence. The whole place felt like it was holding its breath. And then, like a switch being flipped, Karen finally backed off. Her shoulders slumped, and she gave us the tiniest nod. Fine. Just leave. I leaned back and crossed my arms, not letting her off the hook. Not until I see the door close behind you. Her lackeys were already backing out of the room, and Karen turned on her heel, heading toward the exit with her tail between her legs. The sound of her shoes clicking against the floor was the last thing I heard before the door slammed behind her. As Karen and her lackeys disappeared through the door, the rest of the room fell into an eerie silence. The employees left behind, those who had been scribbling away behind their desks, pretending to be community enforcers, just stood there, unsure of what to do next. They weren't prepared for this. They weren't prepared for us. I took a moment to look around the small office, at the pristine desks, the neatly stacked files, the posters on the walls with vague corporate-speak slogans about community standards and neighborhood harmony. It all seemed so sterile, so completely divorced from the reality of the people they were trying to control. This place wasn't about bettering anyone's life. It was about maintaining power, and right now they were completely powerless. Mick stepped up to one of the filing cabinets and opened it, rifling through the papers inside. You know, it's always fun to see how people hide their shady business, he muttered. Let's see what we can find. The receptionist, still standing there with her mouth agape, spoke up hesitantly. You can't just take their stuff. It's illegal. I didn't even flinch. Illegally sending people to our homes. That was illegal. And as far as I'm concerned, everything in this place is fair game now. You're not above the law just because you wave a fake badge. She stepped back, clearly not sure how to handle someone who wasn't intimidated by her supposed authority. But none of us were. We'd seen too much, been through too much, to care about her badges and her fake protocols. Big Jim crossed his arms and shot her a glare. If I were you, I'd start looking for another job. This little empire you've been helping Karen build, it's crumbling. Fast. The receptionist didn't argue, her face pale as she realized that she might have been an unwitting accomplice in something far darker than she'd ever imagined. Outside, we could hear the faint sound of sirens approaching. Karen had probably called the real cops by now, but I wasn't worried. The moment she realized the real authorities weren't on her side, she'd start running for cover. The damage was already done, though it had gone too far. I turned back to Mick, who had found a few more files that he was paging through. "What do we have?" I asked. He looked up, holding a folder marked High Priority. "Oh, you'll love this. It's Karen's little plan for the next few months, property acquisitions under the guise of community compliance. She's been buying up land through shady tactics, trying to get people to either pay the fines or leave." I shook my head, frustrated but not surprised. So that's the game. And we've been playing along with her little schemes. Mick grinned. Not anymore. With that, we walked out of the clubhouse, leaving the wreckage of Karen's reign behind us. The scene was almost surreal. The once pristine, imposing building now seemed small, insignificant. The whole system had been built on fear, on intimidation. And now all it had left was an empty shell. But as we walked back to the bikes, I knew this was far from over. Karen was just one piece of the puzzle, and the real fight was coming. We left the clubhouse behind, the echoes of the confrontation still lingering in the air. The tension that had been building for weeks was finally starting to dissipate, but I knew this wasn't the end of it. The sirens grew louder as they neared, but I wasn't worried. By the time the real authorities showed up, the HOA would already be in damage control mode, scrambling to cover their tracks. The crew gathered outside, leaning against the bikes, their eyes scanning the area, waiting for any sign of trouble. It felt good to stand there, victorious, knowing that we'd sent a message Karen and her people would never forget. But the real kicker, I wasn't just celebrating the fact that we'd put Karen in her place. I was celebrating that we'd uncovered something bigger, something that had been hiding in plain sight. We rode out of the parking lot, leaving the wreckage of the HO behind us. But I knew that Karen wasn't going to let this slide. She had too much to lose. She'd be back. But this time I'd be ready. We all would. Mick called me later that night, his voice almost triumphant. "I've got some more stuff on Karen and her plans. Looks like she wasn't just targeting you. She's been running this scam all over the place. Land grabs, fake fines, and threats. But here's the kicker. She's tied in with a couple of developers who've been trying to buy up properties without the owners knowing." I grinned. It was exactly what I'd expected. Karen wasn't just playing the HOA game. She was using it to line her own pockets. And she thought she could do it without anyone noticing. But now we were on to her, and we weren't going to let her get away with it. As the days passed, the aftermath of our little visit to the clubhouse became a hot topic. The local papers picked up the story with headlines that made it look like we were some kind of outlaw heroes, standing up to a corrupt system. Sure, we weren't the good guys in the traditional sense, but in this case, we were the ones who'd exposed the corruption. And sometimes that's what it takes. Karen went underground for a while, but I knew she'd be back. This wasn't over. And when she resurfaced, she'd have a whole lot more than just the HOA to worry about. We dug deep, uncovered the evidence, and now it was only a matter of time before the rest of the town caught on. As for the rest of the crew, we stayed tight-knit. We didn't need any more reasons to prove our loyalty to each other. We'd already done that. But what we'd done for the community, that was bigger than any one of us. It was a reminder that when people try to control the wrong group, they're bound to meet resistance. And when they do, it's better to be on the side of those who fight for what's right, not what's easy. And Karen, well, she learned the hard way. Power isn't just about having control. It's about knowing who's willing to fight to take it from you. And we'd shown her exactly what happens when you pick the wrong fight.